Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lucia Jar. I'm acting editor-in-chief at Euractiv Slovakia web portal, and it is really my utmost pleasure to welcome you today at the debate titled Arms Control Post-Trump, a Revival of International Initiatives. During today's panel, we are intending to focus on really the latest development within the disarmament and non-proliferation agenda. We will look into what has changed since the last year's event, which we had on the similar subject at which many of you have actually participated at. We will focus on how did changes in the White House with the pandemic influence the developments, what is currently on the table within the arms control agenda, and what is also the future of many initiatives and treaties that the international community is bringing up, is discussing, and even avoiding sometimes to participate at. Particularly, we will look at Slovakia, and we will not forget about the fact that Slovakia has recently become the member of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons and its Executive Council for years 2021 and 2023, and we will also address that. And I'm very glad that you all are here, that we were able to put together such discussions, such distinguished panel, and get on board very interesting people. For this, I would like to thank to our partner, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and its representation in Slovakia. Before I hand the floor to Urban Überschär, who is director for Czech and Slovak Republic, I would like to introduce other crucial people, to whom I would like to express a set of gratitude. Well, it goes to our distinguished guests. We will be hearing from Mrs. Ingrid Brocková, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, who will open the discussion by welcome note. And at the panel, we will welcome Ambassador Marjolein van Dielen, EU Special Envoy for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, Rastislav Križan, Director of the Department for Disarmament and Counterterrorism from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Slovak Republic, and Julia Berghofer, European Leadership Network Policy Fellow and Project Manager for the Younger Generation Leaders Network on Euro-Atlantic Security. All of you, welcome. Another important addition to our debate is you, our audience, here on Zoom or at the Facebook. Thank you for logging in and following us online. I'm really glad that many of you, representatives of state institutions, diplomats, experts, think tankers, academia representatives, and others really interested in this particular topic, get together, came logged in together, and we are very much encourage you to actually become part of the discussion that we will have today. I encourage you to write your questions down at the window. There is an option Q&A. We already received a couple of questions, but we will be very much happy to get more questions. I'll try to incorporate them within the debate. And as said before, I hand over this online floor to another guest of ours, Urban Überschär, Director for Czech Republic and Slovakia at Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, who will officially open our event today. Urban, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lucia. Good morning, everyone, also from my side. First, I would like to warmly welcome all of you on behalf of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation for our event today. I'm also very happy that so many have accepted our invitation. Let me also say thank you to our experts for joining us. We are going to deal with a very important topic. Let me start with a few introductory considerations from my point of view. I think the question formulated in the title of today's event is very important. The question is, arms control post-Trump, a revival of international initiatives. If I were to give an answer to that, I would definitely say yes. Why would I do so? Well, in the past, we have seen what it can mean in concrete terms when international relations and multilateral approaches are no longer seen as important or relevant. And of course, that had a lot to do with former US President Donald Trump. Especially when it comes to arms control, the question of how states cooperate plays an extremely important role. It is not an easy subject, I know, especially since many different actors with very different interests come together here. And of course, political tensions between states around the world have partly increased in the past few months. But I'm very sure that with US President Joe Biden, we have a realistic chance of a fresh start in relations between Europe and the United States. For this, it is important that Europe will be clear about its own position. By the way, this does not only apply to the issue of arms control. Another important point will be to comply with and monitor the agreements that have already entered into force. We should also make sure that we are pursuing the same goals. From my point of view, it is important that we prevent the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction all over the world. But the spread of small arms must also be restricted more effectively in the future. In addition, arms deliveries must be strictly controlled and subject to conditions. Let me say at this point that there are constant discussions about this in Germany as well. These are sometimes difficult discussions between those who completely reject arms exports and those who want to allow them under certain conditions. To me, the only solution to all of these questions can be found in international agreements. These must be transparent and linked to clear conditions. They must involve the big players like the US, Russia, and China, of course. But we should not forget the smaller states, each with their own interests and security needs. Without that, we will not be able to achieve the goal of a more peaceful world. Last but not least, I would like to mention that we started this roundtable 2 years before, and I'm very pleased that we can continue the discussion on arms control with so many experts in this year today. As part of this series, we want to take up current issues again and again and continue the critical dialogue on this topic. Finally, let me also thank our partner Euractiv for the good cooperation. Now I wish us all an exciting event. Thank you for your attention. And now I will give the floor back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Urban, and thank you for having an optimistic, but at the same time quite realistic picture of what we have today in our hands when it comes to arms control. Now I will give a floor and introduce a promised welcome note from Deputy Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of the Slovak Republic, Her Excellency Ingrid Brocková.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to address this event organized by Euractiv. Thank you for this initiative, which we perceive as highly relevant given the contemporary state of arms control and disarmament architecture. I wish all participants a fruitful debate and exchange of views. International security environment is not in the shape we all would like to have it. We are seriously concerned about deteriorating trends and ongoing erosion of arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation architecture. Existing international norms we are equipped with are selectively implemented and commitments not respected. In many cases, we lack meaningful dialogue and mutual trust even among most relevant players. That is worrying. However, this year has already started with encouraging news. The agreement between the United States and Russia on the extension of the New START for 5 years. Slovakia has welcomed and fully supported this step. It should be an impetus to further continue dialogue towards improved strategic stability and security through concluding new arrangement covering wider spectrum of arms and engaging other relevant states. INF Treaty has ended, what are not good news, especially for us Europeans. On top of that, tactical nuclear arsenals stay outside of any international regulatory or control framework. Unfortunately, we do not see much needed political will to move this agenda ahead. The extension of the New START sets undoubtedly a positive tone for the planned NPT review conference, the success of which requires positive engagement of all players and ability to accept compromise. When talking about the NPT, let me reaffirm Slovakia's support to the centrality of the NPT treaty based on balanced approach to all three NPT pillars: disarmament, non-proliferation, and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. We stress the need to implement all commitments under NPT, including Article 6, with the ultimate goal of elimination of all nuclear weapons. We recall that the two nuclear weapon states with the largest arsenals hold a special responsibility in the area of nuclear disarmament and arms control. But other countries, mainly China, should actively contribute to this process so that we could talk about global disarmament architecture. Slovakia is a strong supporter of multilateralism. And indeed, non-proliferation and disarmament require multilateralism more than anything else. We attach high importance to preservation of the JCPOA. Positive signals from the new US administration on the prospect of returning to the treaty are encouraging. Our deep concerns persist regarding Iran's continued violations of the JCPOA. Respect for international commitments and political will are essential ingredients for bringing the JCPOA back on track. We hope the ongoing talks in Vienna will deliver on positive results. For almost 3 decades, international community is challenged with nuclear program of DPRK. With periods of ups and downs, despite negotiations and sanctions, DPRK enjoys rather advanced nuclear capability. It is not easy to recommend what to do, though international community must find a response to the proliferation challenges posed by DPRK through diplomacy. Ladies and gentlemen, the use of chemical weapons by anybody under any circumstances constitutes a very serious breach of international law. We denounce the Syrians' continued violation of its obligations under CWC, and the use of chemical weapons are concluded by the reports of the OPCW. I can assure everybody that Slovakia, as a member of OPCW Executive Council for the period of 2021-23, will not be silent face to face such grave violations of international norms and will stand firm in guaranteeing that the spirit and the letter of the convention will be respected by all. No impunity for the use of chemical weapons, notwithstanding reasons. Thank you.
And we thank to Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Slovak Republic, as she has really outlined the most crucial topics of the ongoing discussion within the arms control agenda, including developments within the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, or NPT, reopened discussions within the New START deal between the US and Russia, post-INF treaty debates, as well as agreements or not agreements with Iran or challenges of the nuclear agenda of the North Korea. So we will certainly dive deeper into those crucial elements and those crucial parts of the present disarmament and non-proliferation initiatives. But as Deputy Minister said, they are being selectively implemented, and various commitments of these agreements are not even respected often. So why is that so? We hope to look for the answers within with our 3 panelists within this debates that we have for about 1 hour 15 minutes that we have. So let's get into it. Our debate will consist or will be framed by 4 main subjects. Firstly, we will discuss the current state of the play within the arms control agenda. We hear that it's really wide based on many treaties and agreements. But what is the state of play today will be the first part. We will look into the Europe's agenda, particularly what the EU and the European countries are doing and can do within this portfolio. Further, we will look into the international cooperations, because obviously Europe cannot do anything by itself, and the world cannot do anything without Europe as well. And at the end, we shall evaluate trends and prospects and the future of the arms control with our three distinct panelists that I've already introduced. So let's get into it. Without further ado, we took some time. Ambassador Van Dielen, let's with really the views from Brussels. What is the state of play now of arms control from your perspective? Which agreements may be the most crucial from your point of view? What agenda is really the highest priority at your work as the EU's special envoy for disarmament and non-proliferation?
Thank you very much, Lucia, and thank you for those questions and for inviting me, and especially for organizing this important event. On the state of play, I couldn't agree more with what the Deputy Minister has just set out. We are indeed in very difficult international circumstances, with great tensions between the big players, between Russia, the US, China also, which have led to the demise of a number of treaties, the INF Treaty, which is very important for Europe, as well as the Open Skies Treaty. So we were very, very pleased, like Slovakia, that New START got extended with 5 years in January by the new US administration. But this is, of course, only a point of departure. It buys us 5 years, but in those 5 years, I think those parties will really need to work on future agreements that have a longer time span, and that also include more weapon systems, because especially tactical missiles, which are very important for Europe, are now not covered by anything. So there's a lot of work to be done, but for that work to be able to take off, it is crucial that the big players can discuss those topics and get to negotiations. We are not at that space yet, I think. It is, first of all, there's a need for dialogue and for confidence building between them. So we are very much looking forward to the meetings next week, the summit between the US and Russia, and there's also NATO summit and the G7 summit. At these events or at the just between the big players, the EU does not have a seat at the table. So what we do is encourage those players to get on with it, to start their dialogues, and we express our concerns to them. The EU does have a very important role to play in multilateral treaties that have a wide membership, such as the NPT that you already mentioned. But there's also the CTBT, which is the treaty that prohibits nuclear testing. There is the chemical weapons conventions, the biological weapon conventions. And the EU, being multilateral at heart, takes a very constructive and forward-leaning role in these initiatives. Unfortunately, in those multilateral treaties, also these same tensions are visible. So it's important that we all step up and make sure that multilateralism keeps working for us. And that's an important role. And in that, every country has a role to play. So I'm really happy to see Slovakia step up to the Executive Council of the OPCW, because that's another area where we discuss very sensitive issues, such as the repeated use of chemical weapons in Syria, the Skripal case, the Navalny case. So also there's a lot of work.
as it was said, and also the title of our event is saying, is there a revival of international initiatives? Because clearly, last 5 years were a little bit difficult. I think a job of people like you, like people that are active in disarmament, probably got much harder. Usually, it is not really usual to cancel deals, right? Especially such difficult and very prominent deals as the deals in nuclear disarmament. But still, we've seen that the Washington was stepping down, and all the work that was done, all the agreements, all the effort was somehow, especially for instance with INF, with New Start, we didn't know if anything will happen, if there would be any changes. There were even discussions about new testing starting a couple of maybe months even ago. So is the situation now, I know we are just in June, but is the situation now calmer? Do you see that it got a little bit more positive than it was perhaps a couple of years ago?
Well, I think it's wise not to only look at the U.S. administration. I think we've seen the violation of the INF treaty. We've seen some very strong rhetoric by Russia in the past 5 years on their nuclear deterrent. We've seen China becoming much more active in the international arena and being by far not as transparent about their nuclear status. So it's I don't say it takes two to tango, but it's interactions between different parties. But I'm really happy to see that the Biden administration is now really trying to put things back on track. Well, I have great hopes that with the meetings next week, that very important dialogue can restart on the right foot. But for that, they also need the interlocutors on the other side. And
are you particularly, and I'm going to be maybe diving a little deeper into your work, but when you are discussing, for instance, you said that the situation now with Washington is a little bit easier, but when discussing, for instance, with Moscow or Beijing, how keen are those administrations to talk to you, to talk to EU on those topics?
Yeah. So with the US, we have historically always kept very good relations and very frequent interaction. With Russia, unfortunately, that has stalled a little bit over the last few years. We remain very open to discuss issues on disarmament and non-proliferation with them, but that has been difficult. And we also have a very good bilateral dialogue with China. The last one of those was held in January last year, where we can have very frank exchanges.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to Mr. Križan, and maybe a little bit to get some views from Central Europe and Slovakia. Deputy Minister in her speech mentioned that really the multilateralism is something that Slovakia is looking for. We may get a little bit later into the agenda which Slovakia will have in OPCV, but what is on the agenda for Central European countries within the topic within this year, after pandemic, what you and your department particularly is dealing with?
Good morning, everyone. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Euractiv, for organizing this event. I'm very pleased to be here already for the second time in the last probably 6-7 months. What I'm going to talk about, I think most of it was already addressed by Ambassador Pardilan, that I will repeat already what has just been said. But anyway, I will start from the topic of this event, arms control post-Trump, a revival of international initiatives. So the question is there a difference in approach to ADN arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation agenda between present and previous US administration. Yes, we feel the difference. I don't think there is any difference in substance, in perception of threats, but rather in the approach to problem management, management of crisis situation, more predictability, more multilateralism, more transatlantic interaction, more communication with us, allies. That's what we like and prefer, but that's what we feel in the present US administration. When we speak about WMD, we have in mind mostly nuclear, but we cannot omit two other categories of nuclear weapons of mass destruction: the chemical and biological weapons. There is, of course, not much to control or disarm because they are forbidden, but it doesn't mean that we are not exposed to those risks or threats. Biological weapons, BWC prohibits biological and toxic weapons, but has, I think, the weakest regime in place. The clash of interest between those countries that prefer stricter control and those demanding access to technology is obvious and persistent. 9 review conference, which is scheduled to August 2022, it's written on my board, I have to check it, was postponed, but it's a challenge for us, for the whole community, because overall effectivity of the convention is rather low, and without political will, there is no way forward. Then we have chemical weapons. CWC convention has a robust organizational structure, strong verification regime with special on-site inspections. This system of verification is very, very unique, and we need to protect it. It is vulnerable, as the development in the last weeks, months, and years clearly shows. And the nuclear weapons, nuclear arsenals, our global system we have in place from outside observer could look a little bit intricate or obscure. It has undergone a long development, turbulent one, but it works. It works because we have peace for more than 70 years. This is the fact. So it has delivered some results. Of course, world without nuclear weapons, and as Deputy Minister already mentioned, is our ultimate goal. And we have to acknowledge that we are far from that. But on the road, we believe. The Non-Proliferation Treaty and CTBT, Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, are major components of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime in present century. IAEA plays, International Atomic Energy Organization in Vienna plays crucial role in verification and guarantees. With comprehensive safeguards agreement, which must be international standards, without which peaceful uses of nuclear energy should be out of question. CTBT monitoring system is also very, very unique, with wider implication going beyond nuclear explosion monitoring. Let me a little bit tackle on NPT, because we are preparing, all of us are preparing for upcoming review conference. And Slovakia considers NPT as a cornerstone of the global non-proliferation disarmament system. With all 3 pillars, disarmament, non-proliferation, and peaceful uses, balanced coexistence, balanced approach. We stress to implement all commitments, including disarmament obligations, especially designed for nuclear weapon states. As already was mentioned several times, the ultimate goal is clear: the elimination of nuclear weapons. From our point of view, through step-by-step approach. Two nuclear weapon states has the largest the special responsibility in the area of nuclear disarmament, what has already been mentioned by previous speakers. We like new winds blowing from Washington, and we hope they will be properly answered also from the side of Moscow. We very much welcome strategic talks between Russia and United States, the summit of leaders, which is scheduled to be on June 16 in Geneva. And let's see whether we could label them strategic talks. We hope so. From our side, full support to extension of New START treaty. Sailing of deployed nuclear strategic arsenal is very important first step for global security. I'm saying first step because we believe that other talks about arms reduction, arms control, and disarmament will continue, as was already mentioned by Ambassador Fardilan. Unfortunately, there are other weapons staying outside of this treaty. What matters us a lot. INF, unfortunately, as such, is a history, but our concerns remain. We, of course, expect new settings covering all nuclear arsenals. INF was important for Europe, also for Eastern Europe, for Slovakia, because we share the same continent with Russia. More you go to the east, closer you are to Russian nuclear arsenals, which were covered by INF treaty. There are, of course, other states with less predictable regimes and missiles program, which are within this range. To sum up, apart from strategic arsenals, dealing with non-strategic, especially intermediate range, short range, and also tactical weapons interest us a lot. But of course, a new arrangement with our robust verification regime would probably be only a piece of paper. Verification and transparency is crucial for confidence building measures. This should be an indispensable part of each and every disarmament and arms control treaty. Let me talk a little bit about two major proliferation crises from our perspective, Iran and North Korea. The preservation of JCPOA, very important, very high on our agenda. We, of course, regret US withdrawal from the JCPOA, but we understand the reasons. And more, we welcome President Biden's administration will to negotiate with Iran new terms. We very much hope that another round of talks, which starts, I think, this Thursday in Vienna, will deliver positive results. We remain, of course, very much concerned, deeply concerned at Iran's actions inconsistent with JCPOA. World need guarantees of peaceful character of Iran's nuclear program according to international standards. We want nothing more, just standards. This is general approach to each and every country which has nuclear energy capacity. Other options would be possibly disastrous. Continuation of dialogue, respect of international law, and strong political will are very necessary ingredients to bring JCPOA fully back on track. Let's see and let's hope.
Yes.
DPRK, nuclear and ballistic missile program of this country is the source of proliferation, spreading beyond the region. We know it's a very high risk. And we join other countries requesting DPRK to disarm completely. this this song we sing very often, but there are no results. On top of this, correct me if I'm mistaken, but the PRK is the only country that detonated nuclear device in this century. This is not very encouraging. To conclude, the perception of the risks we see also from the fact that there are other countries with nuclear military capacity that stay outside of NPT regime, and which actually blocks the universalization of NPT. And it is rather challenging issue for integrity of NPT as such and global ADN system. Last point I would like to mention is nuclear safety and security. We need to focus here more to strengthen existing tools so that we prevent terrorism and non-state actors from having access to Wmd technology and materials. Because with globalization, access to technology, online information sharing, the distances are shorter now than before. These tasks become harder and harder and more urgent and urgent today. Thank you very much. I think this is.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Križan. You painted a really a larger picture of where is Slovakia standing at in various of these agreements. So I'm not going to break down those. We will get back to the discussion with you in a second. And for the particular topic of OPCW, which I'm very much interested, let's go to Berlin and to Julia, because you, from the point of view as an analyst, you can get a little bit bigger picture of the recent changes within the arms control. So we have heard the points from Brussels, from Bratislava, but what are the most crucial debates? I think we've already heard some, but from your point of view, which are really the top, I don't know, top three or something that we have on the global scene of arms control?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. Thanks to Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and Euractiv. It's for me a great honor to be on such a distinguished panel with the ambassador, Mr. Križan. It's really a big question. I try to limit myself as much as I can, and I would like to. So in order not to just agree with what has already been said, it's always difficult to come after such strong statements. I would like to give a bit context on conventional as well as nuclear arms control. I don't know whether it's exactly top two or three topics, but let me just quickly guide our audience through a field with many acronyms and even more open question. So I think if we look at the current state of arms control, it can be characterized, and here I like the title of what the novelist Gabriel Garcia Marquez wrote, A Death Foretold. So if we look at the global arms control scene, where we see an overall erosion of nuclear and even more so conventional arrangements, we can confidently say that many of these downside developments were predictable. So the INF Treaty collapse has been looming since the Obama administration raised concerns about Russia's compliance. So it really didn't come as a surprise when the US under Trump announced its withdrawal in response to the deployment of the 9 and 729. In the conventional field, we have seen an even more dramatic degradation of arms control since the early 2000s with the abrogation of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, the NBM Treaty, in 2002. The slow death of the Conventional Forces in Europe treaty after Russia suspended implementation in 2007. And now, and that's something I've been concentrating on in the past few weeks very much, the uncertain future of the Open Skies treaty after the US have left the treaty and after the Russian announcement to withdraw as well. At the same time, states party have failed to do important steps like modernization of the Vienna document to make it fit for today's challenges, or to agree on an adapted CFE treaty. I don't want to dig into this issue deeper. It's just, one can say that the skeleton of a large portion of the Cold War and post-Cold War conventional arms control architecture is formally in place, but technically it's dead. And that bears, of course, the risk of unwanted escalation due to the lack of CSBMs, functioning risk reduction measures, and of course, due to the conventional imbalance between Russia and the US. I don't want to end on a positive note. And in fact, we do see positive developments. New START has been mentioned. The Biden administration has quickly shown that progress is possible. And while some thought that the extension of New START looked rather unlikely at the end of the Trump term, if we remember, it was highly difficult back then, things have quickly changed once the Biden team took over. So New START has been one of the few good news in 2021 so far. And it also perfectly makes sense that New START survives. If one looks at the history of 5 decades, I won't take you through all of the details, but if you look back at this 5 decades history in which the US and Russia, formerly the Soviet Union, have been engaging in continuous consultations on the regulation of offensive strategic weapons, including strategic arms limitation talks, the START treaty, SWORD, and so on, one can acknowledge that the risk is comparably low that Moscow and Washington would stop these talks. So this luckily is a part of the arms control agenda where we see continuity, and I'm pretty confident that we see progress after 2026 when the US and Russia will hopefully have come to an agreement on a follow-up treaty that includes newer system, as had already been mentioned. At present, both sides are perfectly sticking to New START limits, and even in pandemic times, that's also a positive note, I guess. When on-site inspections were not taking place, verification through national technical means is still taking place and working. So when we come back to the question of how the pandemic has an impact, I think it's not so dramatic, but that's maybe an issue we will come to later. And final point, of course, the big question is how to bring China on board for future
questions. Maybe if I can extend it. So from the point of view of Washington, it seems that we are kind of getting information, but when we look into Moscow or Beijing, we are probably, at least our part of the world, is not really sure what are the goals over there. So could you, talk a little bit more about their interview, the Moscow one, and particularly now Beijing, because it is clear that each of the nuclear state is talking about China much more, but how to bring them on board, I think this is an ongoing discussion, especially the last few months, maybe a couple of years actually.
Yeah, it's for me, it's very difficult to talk about Russia, because I think most analysts and maybe many diplomats would agree that it's very hard to understand Russia's priorities at the moment. And also it's very hard to understand whether the Russian narrative that NATO is an actual threat to their national security is just a narrative that serves domestic purposes, or is it perceived as a real threat? And then you have to understand how is the interplay between different agencies in Russia. So it can be perceived different in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and can be perceived different in the army. So that's one big question. I think it's also important to understand how important is it for Russia to bring China into a follow-up agreement or into any arms control related agreement. If it's important for Russia, then it would be an opportunity to engage here. If it's not important for Russia, it will be much more difficult to get China in. Just a quick, 2 quick points on China as well. I think it's very important for US and Russia, but also for Europe to embrace a realistic perspective. So don't make Beijing a hindrance for future arms control progress. Then a second point is we need a much better understanding of what is regarded as an arms control benefit from China's perspective. So if you understand that from China's perspective, a preemptive strike from the US and the US missile defense capabilities are one of biggest concern, you have to take this in at some point. And a third and final point is we shouldn't approach the issue just from a Western perspective. Our Western perspective is that France and the UK are countries that we don't have to take in for arms control. From a Russian and a Chinese perspective, that's just different. The UK and France's arsenals are approximately the same size as China's. We can speak about qualitative aspects, but that's another issue. But from a Chinese perspective, it just makes sense to include France and the UK as well in these talks.
Do you think that the other nuclear states are going to be within the debate? Because we're often India, Pakistan, Israel, how to get them on the board, and suddenly aren't they going to be missing in any way? Because really what is needed is just one nuclear bomb to make a disaster.
Yeah, they are definitely needed, and they are missing. They are missing in the NPT debates, and I think that's the issue where we would likely see at least some kind of progress if these countries were prepared to participate in NPT debates on the issue as well. At the moment, I think it would just overstretch Euro-Atlantic arms control if we take in more actors who are in a completely different security environment. As much as I would like to see an agreement that includes all nuclear weapons possessors, including DPRK, and I think it's not a realistic endeavor at the moment at a point. Mm-hmm. So I think the NPT would be really a starting point.
And in order to get them, maybe not in this particular Euro-Atlantic agenda or Russia-US kind of area, but in other areas to get them on board, are there any, I'm going to say sugars, but kind of carrots or tools that larger countries may have in order to attract countries like Israel, Pakistan, India to get on board?
Well, if I knew what that exactly is, I would probably have a very well-paid job in agency. No, I'm just joking. I think the key, unfortunately, but that's, again, a very Western Euro-Atlantic perspective lies with the US and Russia, because as long as they possess like these incredibly big arsenals, and also as long as they highly invest in emerging technologies and new types of missile systems, and I understand we will talk about this maybe later, it's very hard to convince smaller countries that they have to limit themselves. I think a change of perspective is really needed. Because of course, arms control can enhance your security because it means others are limiting their arsenals as well. But you can also take another perspective and you can say, well, maybe it's better to have like a very dynamic nuclear arsenal to protect my national security. It's not very comfortable to acknowledge that, but I think one has to embrace a realistic perspective here.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you for this and for making that note as well. Let's go to Europe, and I think some of the changes that happened in recent months is that European Union lost a nuclear member. Now only France is the country within the European Union that has a nuclear arsenal. But do you think, Mrs. Van Dielen, that the prospects or the point of view of the EU has anyhow shifted? Is the rhetoric, at least within the EU member states, different? Who maybe are other important actors within the debate that you are participating at besides France?
Okay, yeah, thanks for that question. Well, what we really do at the EU is coordinate member states' positions. And as you know, they especially on nuclear issues, we have diverging views, with some countries promoting the TPNW, other countries, the ban treaty, others.
Could you maybe be a little bit more specific so that the audience also know which countries are, for instance, TPNW, it's an important treaty, but there we have 3 countries in the EU that have signed and ratified the treaty. It's Austria, Ireland, and Malta, and they are proponents of that treaty. They have been so internationally, and of course there's also NATO allies within the EU, and you've seen there the statements of NATO on the TPNW. So you can imagine a little bit of discussions we have.
And I think these discussions are really important because as Julia also said, and said before, only through dialogue can you really understand the other's position, and can you try to find a solution for problems. And of course, the TPNW grew out of a sense of frustration with the lack of progress on the disarmament pillar of the NPT, where some states say, well, there's been significant progress in the last 20 years since the height of the Cold War, and we have a number of instruments to work towards that progress in step-by-step approach. So these are important discussions that we have. For the time being, we have agreed to disagree on the specific issue of the ban treaty, and agreed to focus on those areas where we are united, where we can work together, because that is where the EU has a big impact. Because when
these are which that we agreed on.
The centrality of the NPT is very important. The support to the CTBT, the treaty that prohibits nuclear tests, getting the conference on disarmament back to work in Geneva, and it's especially in starting to work on the fissile material cutoff treaty, so to limit the source material for nuclear weapons. On the need for verification and to develop mechanisms for verification. Because as was said in the previous round, without verification, there's not going to be any sustainable agreements in the future. And also to work on risk reduction, because at the stage where we're currently at, how do we make sure that doesn't spiral out of control while we are working on those disarmament steps? So we prepare EU positions, which takes time because it needs a lot of dialogue. We have diverging views sometimes, but when we have them, it's important that we speak up in statements in multilateral meetings, in statements welcoming the extension of New START by the High Representative. We do that in many ways. And we also lobby other states. Sometimes that can be through open events that are organized, where we have an open discussion, and sometimes it's in private discussions through a dialogue or a démarche, when we ask countries to become party to a specific treaty, or to improve implementation, or to work towards a specific multilateral meeting to have a good outcome at a review meeting. So we do that a lot. And when we do that as EU, we are stronger. First of all, because we are a significant bloc and we have multilateralism at our heart. But also because our positions are very constructive, and because they take into account all the views of the member states, they are attractive to many other countries in the world. They look at the EU and say, where are they going? And that can be a guide for them sometimes. So we see a lot of reference to EU positions or alignments to them.
One thing that is part of it, which exact forums are you meeting with member states, particularly you as a special envoy? What are the working groups or councils or the meetings where you are meeting representatives of the member states?
We have, in my area, two working groups. We call them council working groups. That's where the member states come together every month from their capitals. Of course, now everything being run virtually. One of them we call the CONOP, which is on non-proliferation, and it's actually taking place today. We have a specific chair for that, to run that. And the other one is COARM, that deals more with arms export controls on the conventional side, and the Arms Trade Treaty, and a number of those issues. Plus, we also meet from time to time at the level of directors, where we meet Radislav, to take a bit strategic approach and to look at where we are. And of course, we also have the Commission, the European Commission, who's, for example, they deal with everything that is dual-use export controls. And so the exports of goods that can be potentially be used in a nuclear weapons program. Those are limited.
And then outwards within the EU, how is the communication with the institutions? For instance, you are part of the European External Action Service, so basically European Commission. But in regards to, let's say, European Parliament or a council.
Yeah. So with the member states, there is also the PSC, of course, and they generally they meet a few times a year to discuss these topics. And I did a presentation at PSC just last Thursday. The European Parliament also regularly debates. They had a very good decision on the NPT last year, and I had just started. I presented myself to Parliament, and I might show up again. My predecessor did, so that's also an important factor. The Commission, they participate in the working groups as well, in order for the EU to work holistically. And maybe one interesting resource could be our annual WMD report. Annually, we report on what we've done in the past year in the area of WMD, and there we really try to incorporate the work of also the other institutions, especially the European Commission has a lot of programs in supporting states in nuclear security and export controls, and you'll find those there as well. The EU Joint Research Center also contributes a lot to that. Also, they help us out with the technical questions about verification. And we have a state-of-the-art lab in Karlsruhe. So it's really important to try and have all these resources that we have focused in the same direction. And if I may mentioning resources, because we present our positions, but we don't only preach. We also want to foster cooperation with other states and support where necessary. And we still see there's a lot of countries that could use support in implementing treaties, for example, or international rules and regulations. So we can offer that assistance. Sometimes it's practical assistance, but very often it's financial assistance to provide for trainings, very practical things. Mm-hmm. We can also do that via the IAEA, for example, the International Atomic Agency in Vienna, where we have a big contribution to make. So it's important to position ourselves across the spectrum in what we do, not just the member states, also the institutions and all instruments, not only say the political statements, but also the practical support.
Thank you very much. I think that's really a wide agenda you're having. Mr. Krijan, we've heard that member states are being involved in various discussions in the groups. And my question is that whether Slovakia is really a small country, not having quite experience with, for instance, training of disarmament when it comes to chemical weapons, but maybe not with many others. How can we, as a small country, present our position, or even convince any other country to kind of get on board with us? What are the limitations for small countries to play any role within such wide debate?
Thank you. What is the role of small countries? It's a more philosophical question, but small countries usually don't play a big role in global issues, we have to admit. In cases they act separately, but if they join together, the cumulative voice can have substantial strength. Our strength is in one voice of EU and NATO. We are members of EU and NATO. And as was already mentioned by Ambassador Van Dil, there are various groups where we discuss the questions, where we shape the policy of NATO. The same is valid for, where we shape the policy of EU, and the same is valid for NATO, where we contribute to creating the policy of EU, and also contribute to where we implant our priorities in the decisions and common positions which are presented outside.
Therefore, and then what is, sorry?
Yes?
Then what is the motivation, for instance, to go beyond, to, for instance, become a member of the Executive Council of OPCW? Why would a small country want to even participate there?
First of all, when we speak about Executive Council, the motivation is to strengthen the camp of like-minded countries, the camp of democratic countries, in promoting the agenda, the values in OPCW, and to protect the OPCW and our interest there. So this is the main motivation, to contribute.
And what is Slovakia particularly getting out of it? I understand the philosophical kind of background of it, but why would we be interested, particularly in the chemical part of this WMD?
Okay, so this is not our first membership in Executive Council. This is our 5th membership.
Okay.
So that means this is nothing new. This is more or less a regular, not the rotation, but regular interest of my country to be part of Executive Council and to contribute to shaping the policy. And also it is, for us, it is also recognition of a long-term and consistent policy of my country in the field of non-proliferation. Elimination of weapons of mass destruction, in this case, chemical weapons. And also, as I mentioned, the main point is that we can strengthen the voice of like-minded countries in defending similar values.
And is there some kind of agenda? We've heard that the membership at the Executive Council is for 2 years for Slovakia for now. Is there any particular agenda that or goals that Bratislava is intending to reach within the council?
I wouldn't say that we have a specific or specific program or list of goals we would like to achieve during our Executive Council membership. Our priority is to facilitate the functioning of OPCW, proper and smooth functioning of OPCW at the political but also professional level in compliance with priorities of CWC. And also, our priority is to guarantee the unique system of OPCW has. This is, from our point of view, is very crucial in this time when impartiality and expertise of the organization is questioned by some of its own members. Of course, as was already mentioned by Ambassador Van Dil, there are hot topics on the agenda of OPCW. It is first, use of chemical weapons in Syria. Second, cases of Skripal and Navalny. These are the cases we will focus on because it was mentioned by deputy minister at the beginning of this event, no impunity regarding use of chemical weapons. Use of chemical weapons by anybody under any circumstances is not acceptable. This is our consistent policy, and we will go to Executive Council with this in mind.
Okay. And besides the chemical weapon, obviously, we weren't talking about the general development of the nuclear chemical weapons. And Julia, I'm going to address to you because many treaties and activities of the international community are often focusing on somewhat conventional, not just conventional arms, but rather arms that are well known. But certainly technology seems to be evolving much faster than the initiatives and of non-proliferation or disarmament. So what are maybe the new technologies that you seem that you see as very valid in arms development, and what are the modern maybe challenges for the new treaties or the treaties that we currently have?
Yeah, thanks for this question. Again, a very big question, and I will not be able to address every single point, because actually I think there are really a range of emerging and disruptive technologies, EDTs, that are crucial in that space. And the spectrum reaches really from artificial intelligence, cyberspace, to quantum computing and new types of missiles. My short input will focus on the latter one. Happy to comment on the other fields as well to the extent I can. So if I may, let me just take you on sort of a quick ride through the development in the missile field. And please note, this is absolutely far from being an exhaustive list. I would say there are three crucial developments at the moment: testing and production of dual-capable missiles, of hypersonic weapons, and of precision-guided munitions. So the technology behind these developments is not exactly new. Actually, some of that just dates back already decades ago. But it is the intensifying great power competition that increasingly drives the design of new variants, and that could potentially challenge strategic stability in an unprecedented way, also for Europe. Now let's start with hypersonic weapons quickly. Russia, the US, and China are all testing such weapons. In the US, for example, it happens under the Prompt Global Strike programs, but they also have other programs. Hypersonic weapons are maneuvering weapons. They can travel at Mach 5 or even up to Mach 10. That's incredibly fast. So the flight time between launch and target can be 10 minutes or even less. And their speed, their maneuverability, and the low flight altitude makes detection and interception almost impossible. For example, when you have a terrestrial-based radar that is only capable of detecting an incoming hypersonic weapon in a very final flight phase. So that compresses the decision time or the time in which decision makers can assess their answer. So the US are actually focusing on conventionally equipped hypersonically glide vehicles and hypersonic cruise missiles with short and intermediate ranges. Russia and China, on the other hand, are designing weapons that can carry a conventional as well as a nuclear warhead, which adds to the problem of ambiguity and creates pressure, again, for the US side to make their systems more accurate. So that's how the arms race is actually going. Another trend which I quickly want to mention is testing and development of precision-guided weapons or munitions, including air and ship-launched missiles, multiple launch rockets, and guided bombs. In the definition of the US DoD, PGMs are guided weapons intended to destroy a point target and minimize collateral damage. For the US, it's especially attractive to use them against Russian and Chinese A2AD capabilities. At the moment, just to give you a flavor, Lockheed Martin are developing such a type, the Precision Strike Missile. The acronym is PRISM. And this surface-to-surface system, as well as one other system that the US are currently designing after the demise of the INF, and here we are at the treaty field, they lack the range to use them against targets in Asia. That's interesting, because therefore the only setting where it makes sense to deploy them would be in Europe. Now, we know that NATO doesn't plan to station nuclear-tipped missiles in Europe as a response to Russia's violation of the INF Treaty, but we don't know whether in the long term that excludes a return of conventional ground-launched intermediate-range missiles as well. So the development of these and other new types of missiles raise serious questions and challenges for the future of arms control. A good sign is that Russia has already stated that its new ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, SAMAT, that can be equipped with the avant-garde hypersonic glide vehicle falls actually under the limitation of New START. That's a good sign. But the other question is, how will they deal with other projects? So you might have heard about the nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed underwater drone called Poseidon. You might have heard about a system called Borestnik and the Zircon hypersonic missile. So these are just open questions. I won't go into more detail. So that means if we have possible new agreements, they have to deal with hypersonics, precision-guided munitions as well, and they have to address the problem of dual-capable missiles, at least through risk reduction measures like advance notice before testing. There could be also bans and moratoria on hypersonic missiles, but that again raises the question of how to bring China on board.
Mm-hmm. The topic of new technologies is going to be one of the central also at the upcoming summit of NATO, and certainly NATO is an important international actor from the European perspective, but in general at the global stage. It is claiming to have a long-standing commitment to an active policy in arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. However, similarly to the EU, the alliance is not really making any ADN agreements by itself, and it stays at the hands of the member states. However, could NATO become even more important forum for consultations and on the arms control and risk reduction that you mentioned, and maybe other confidence and security building measures?
Yeah, certainly. As you mentioned, NATO itself does not do arms control. So NATO doesn't sign a treaty, NATO doesn't negotiate them with a third party. That's always in the hand of the member states. But what NATO can do is actually provide a forum for depth consultations between the allies on pressing arms control, disarmament, non-proliferation, so-called ADN issues. It can, and that shouldn't be underestimated, facilitate dialogue and exchange of views and help to develop common positions that member states can bring into other fora, such as the NPT. Now, NATO is, of course, not the only forum for exchanging views on threat perceptions. Think of the EU's and the EU's strategic compass, but it's a natural forum because we have like-minded states there. We are focusing on defense and deterrence, and in that sense, the Secretary General has recently also re-emphasized that arms control is actually in NATO's DNA. And if we look back at history, and you see I like looking back in history, it is absolutely true that it's in NATO's DNA. So, for example, just to give you a quick example, during the late 60s and 70s, NATO has been used by the US for consultations on a strategic arms limitation talks between the Soviet Union and the US. So what the US administration did was regularly briefing and consulting partners in NATO bodies, for example, before and after every round of negotiations with the Soviet side. And even closer consultations happened in the process of negotiating SALT II. So providing space for consultations between allies is one thing that NATO can do to support progress. Another thing is to, at some point, resume dialogue in the NATO-Russia Council, especially on risk reduction measures. That sounds a bit dim at the moment. Chances are low because although the NRC has been an effective forum until 2014, you can imagine it's becoming more difficult, and Russia has not responded to invitations lately. Now, with regards, when we are a bit forward-looking now to the NATO summit and to the new strategic concept, it would be certainly it would be certainly important to have a strong language on arms control and risk reduction measures, both in a summit communique and as a consequence also in the strategic concept. So NATO will certainly re-emphasize on its dual track approach, which consists of having strong deterrence, strong defense while pursuing while keeping the door open for dialogue with Russia. But that again is in the hands of the member states, and we know that in recent weeks and months it has been very difficult with the Russian side, especially in the past year. So I think the ambassador has already spoken about the divergent positions. We don't have divergent positions in NATO to an extent that some are supporting the ban treaty and some not. In NATO, there is actually no state who supports the ban treaty, but still threat perceptions are diverging. If you're on the eastern flank, it's definitely different than if you're Spain or France. But to sum this up, the important thing that NATO can really do, and I think it should really not be underestimated, is to have these consultations between like-minded partners.
Mm-hmm. We also received a question from the audience, and it's regarding the no first use concept, meaning some kind of a pledge or a policy by a nuclear power not to use any nuclear weapon as a mean of warfare unless they are first attacked by some other country. Are there any discussions? I think there is something at the US, but do you see at the international forums or amongst the countries that somebody might be interested in adopting this no first use concept?
So just to give you quickly a context, that is something, the no first use debate has seen a resurgent since Biden took office. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing behind that is that Biden, in his time as vice president and when he was running for president, he mentioned sole purpose. He didn't exactly mention no first use. And he said something like the sole purpose of nuclear weapons should be deterring an adversary and, if necessary, retaliating against a nuclear attack. So it's not exactly the same like no first use. And also this administration has of course not made clear yet what sole purpose actually means. And we will see whether it will be included in the US nuclear posture review. So we can muse around what could be the effects of no first use policy if the US were to adopt it. But we will only see after the NPR comes out whether in that case sole purpose will be part of that, and also what sole purpose means. In a sense, it could, for example, means that nuclear weapons shouldn't play a role in war fighting. That would have an effect on tactical nuclear weapons in Europe as well. We've seen that the Obama administration was keen to embrace such a concept, and they've seen, as far as I know, some opposition from allies. So at the moment, I do see the debate, but I think the debate is mainly taking place in expert circles among activists. And I think you can only make a real assessment once we see the new nuclear posture review.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So the debates is at the expert level, not that as high as political could get. We only have actually 10 minutes to wrap up this discussion. So let's move into some trends and prospects and the future of arms control. Ambassador Van Dielen, what is really an upcoming agenda for you as a special envoy, and maybe what are your expectations for next couple of years? What we are going to see, which treaties, agreements, discussions will actually take a front row, and maybe what will stay in the back?
Okay, in the current circumstances, I'm not sure there will be many discussions in the backseat. A lot of issues are becoming priorities, so that's a juggling act. In terms of agenda for the next 6 months or so, the NPT review conference is the is the big one for us. It's going to be a really important meeting, and it's a shame it's had to be postponed because of the pandemic. But it's very important that all states parties to the NPT look each other in the eye, take stock of where we are and how well the NPT has been implemented, but especially look forward. How do we take it from here for the next 5 years, which is the review cycle of the NPT, or the next 10 years, or even the next 50 years, because we've just celebrated the 50th anniversary of the NPT. And a similar meeting, as Ratislav already mentioned, will take place on the Biological Weapons Convention. That's also been postponed, unfortunately. There too, we can use that time to prepare ourselves better as for the NPT. And the PPTWC is now become much more a focus of interest because of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. It was always a little bit the backwaters of arms controls, not rightly so, but in the public eye it was. But the pandemic has shown us what havoc can be created if a biological weapon is used. So the pandemic really serves as a reminder that we need to continue developing these instruments. Mm-hmm. And as you may know, the Biological Weapon Convention is the only one that doesn't have a verification protocol. Yeah. We would still want to work towards one. Mm-hmm. But in the absence of that, we try to develop as many mechanisms as possible to make the convention work in practice for us.
So, do you think that biological weapons or non-proliferation of those tools could get exactly because of pandemic somewhere more to the front in upcoming years? Because as you're correctly mentioning, we all seen what a disaster pandemic can create, or any kind of epidemic. Do you think that in upcoming years we will see much more of that? Is there any ambition to set up some kind of control mechanisms?
Yeah. Well, the EU is very much has always been in favor of a verification mechanism, but as with all these treaties, you need consensus to start building something, and that consensus is currently still absent. So we still strive for that. But if you can't have what you're aiming for in the long run, you have to start developing mechanisms to approach that situation as well as possible. So I'm really hoping that discussion now gets new oxygen because of the pandemic. There's still, the pandemic is not biological warfare, it's another thing.
Yes, of course.
But it's energized it. And the Biological Weapons Convention has some articles on mutual assistance in terms of crisis. And those have been used right now during the pandemic, and now we've seen how they can be elaborated further. So that will be important work for the coming time. But I'd also like to mention the Chemical Weapon Convention and the OPCW, because the discussions there are very difficult, but they're essential too. I mean, we cannot tolerate the use of chemical weapons. This has to stop. We had just had a conference of states parties a month ago in The Hague. There'll be another one at the end of the year, and in the meantime we have executive council meetings. So those will also be very important for us. And I would be amiss if I didn't mention missile proliferation, because you have set out that's a big concern. The only instrument that currently exists is the Hague Code of Conduct, which is not a treaty, but a confidence building instrument where states notify each other of missile launches, and where there's an exchange of information. And the EU is doing a lot of work in getting more states to sign up to this very important mechanism. In the absence of an international treaty, to increase confidence or to assist confidence building in this important area, because the developments are risky, and we need to do what we can to limit those. So that's maybe for the agenda in the coming time. And maybe one more thing, if you allow me. Multilateralism is, of course, a core value of the EU. So we also uphold the institutions that support the treaties. Like we have assisted the OPCW for their new lab, for their important outreach work. We are assisting the IAEA in nuclear security, for example. We are assisting the Secretariat of the Biological Weapon Conventions to do outreach. We continue preparing important financial contributions from the EU side in order for the multilateral institutions to do their work better.
Mm-hmm. So it really seems like an extremely rich agenda, especially within upcoming months. Mr. Križan, from point of view of Slovakia, we've heard maybe the main upcoming events that are coming, but maybe does Bratislava have some kind of like goals or really special points where it is looking for or working for? We don't hear you, the microphone. The mute button, yes, there you go.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So, not much to add to what was already mentioned. Mm-hmm. This year was already expected to be important year for disarmament, but due to pandemics, everything was postponed. 2 major review conferences with 5-year cycle, NPT review conference, the most important, and also BWC review conference, postponed to the next year. Okay, we will have more time to negotiate, maybe more time to prepare ourselves, but the review cycle is important to finalize with regular review conferences. So having a review conference as soon as possible priority. And we also hope that we can strike a deal at the review conference, means that all countries will agree with the commitments which will be enshrined in final document. That will not be easy. Then our hopes are very high about strategic talks between US and Russia. We look towards June 16, the summit of presidents. We will see what will come out of this. But we hope that it will bear some fruits in the form of at least continued dialogue about strategic stability and better transparency, a little bit increase in confidence building measures, which are very low right now. We also believe that in the future, all nuclear arsenals, apart from strategic ones, under a New START treaty, will be addressed in future agreements among most relevant stakeholders, including those arsenals which fall inside INF and tactical weapons. And regarding chemical weapons convention, of course, there are 2 major cases on the table of the OPCW, and we believe that those cases will not weaken the stance of OPCW as the major instrument, global non-proliferation regime, but rather will strengthen the institution.
Yeah, that's the Syria and Skripal case that you mentioned, right? Yes.
Navalny and Skripal, and also Syria.
Yes.
And regarding GCPOA, because it is now a very
mentioned.
Regarding GCPOA, we believe that some form of agreement will be, which will guarantee peaceful nuclear program of Iran. It's very important.
I see. So Slovakia remains hopeful for many treaties and agreements. Julia, some last remarks for you, some outlook and maybe some application and execution of the international treaties. What do you expect from the short-term and long-term developments?
Sure, I try to be brief because I see we already...
Yes.
I just wanted to add one point on what Ambassador van Dalen said about it's a shame that the NPT RevCon had to be postponed. It is, in a sense, also because we don't know whether it's really taking place in August or later. There's some insecurity around that, unclarity. But I think it's better to have the RevCon in 2021 or 2022 even than to have it at a time when Trump is still in office, because I think that will completely change, or it will at least add some constructive flavor to the NPT. But that's my personal view. On outstanding issues, I think it's very important to summarize it for Europe to step up and to find their voice. Mm-hmm. Europe has to, and I'm not talking about specific NATO or EU, Europe, but European states, if they want to defend their interests, they have to feed into the New START process. They have to feed in ideas. They have to call for further cuts in the Russian and US arsenal. Likewise, Europe should have a say when it comes to to the possibility of new intermediate range missiles in Europe. It's very important for European states to have a coherent stance here. And last but not least, I've mentioned the Open Skies Treaty. We will lose an important tool for military-to-military dialogue, and that's it will be difficult to replace that. One of the priorities, I would say, is really to start on a working level and to find a way to re-establish military-to-military dialogue between the West and Russia.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we see there are plenty of new initiatives that are ongoing. The building of mutual trust is still in place and has to find a maybe larger spot. In the agenda of arms control, non-proliferation and disarmament, there are very interesting prospects. We touched upon several of them. I think that we all can imagine that it can be break down into each type of maybe arms or the deals, and we could have talked for hours. We get this 90 minutes for which I have to thank to our audience, to your active team, to Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and particularly to our panelists, Ambassador Marjolin van Dalen, Mr. Rastislav Križan, and Julia Berghofer for coming and sharing your opinions with us and really bringing us and breaking down this complex topic of arms control. So thank you very much, all of you, to participate. I think it was a very interesting discussion, and we are looking forward to host you in the future as well. Have a good day, everybody.